Okay, I'll call the December 10th Planning Commission meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. Can I get a roll call?
Chair Nicole Hendricks.
Here.
Ron Heberlein.
Here.
Matt Constantine.
Here.
Andrew Carr.
Here.
Yana Semenova.
Here.
Jennifer Willard. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, moving forward to citizen input. Oh, and we're joined by Commissioner Willard, for the record. Moving on to citizen input. So this is the time that citizens have the opportunity to address the Planning Commission regarding any item that is not already scheduled for a formal public hearing or public work session tonight. Therefore, if any member of the audience, either here in City Hall or via Zoom, would like to speak about any other matter of concern, please raise your hand or send a message to the recorder using the Zoom chat function so that we may hear from you now. If you have not already, please fill out a testimony card and give it to the clerk. Also, please state your name and address for the record, or state that your address is as provided on the testimony card. Please come forward to the podium when you are called forward, or unmute yourself on Zoom when the clerk requests. Is there anyone that would like to testify at this time?
If you are online and would like to testify, please raise your hand now. I am not seeing any hands raised.
All righty, thank you. Then we're going to proceed to the consideration of the November 12th, 2025 Planning Commission minutes. Those were previously distributed. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes are approved as distributed. Okay, and then we're going to move to our work session item. So for the Housing Statutory Compliance Part 1 discussion, this work session is a chance for the Planning Commission to gain additional understanding of and provide guidance on ongoing legislative projects prior to a public hearing. As a courtesy, the Planning Commission will, as time permits, allow for limited public comment on the topic after staff have presented their report for the Commission's purpose of continuing to understand the project. However, it should be noted that this is not a public hearing, and any participants are encouraged to participate in a future public hearing for legal standing purposes. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to the city team to present what they've prepared for the work session.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners and Chair Hendricks. Let me pull up my presentation here real quickly. We'll get started.
Introduce myself really quickly.
Sure.
Okay. Hi, good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Heather Austin. I've been helping your staff with the project this evening, the analysis of the development code. I'm with 3J Consulting. We do a lot of code work throughout the state, so here to support your staff this evening and help with any questions you have.
All right, and I am Kim Reibold, Senior Planner with the city, and I'm going to walk through a presentation for you tonight about the project, and with the goal of giving you some background information, and then we'll have some discussion at the end to get some of your input as we move forward. This is called the Housing Statutory Compliance Project, and that is in large part because much of what we're doing in this work has to do with legislation that was passed during the 2025 legislative session by the state of Oregon. So this is in two parts, responding primarily to two different pieces of legislation. The first part is what our focus will be on tonight at the work session. This part is a little more procedural in nature. The second part of the project, which we will begin after we do this first part in mid-2026, will focus more on updates to some of our development standards related to middle housing, as well as some other related changes that respond to a different piece of legislation. So our objectives tonight are explaining to you why we're doing this project and what a lot of the requirements that we'll be working with are. And in addition to that, explaining how this could impact our current land use application process for development review, and how we're going to work in some of the recommendations we made earlier this year as part of our housing production strategy. To do that, we will, after providing you with some background, present the results of a code audit that Heather and 3J worked on with us. That really, we hope, will serve as a basis for understanding what we need to change in our process and what other options we have to ensure the best fit for how we want to have our land use process for residential development moving forward. And then we'll conclude tonight by getting your input on some specific items, which we've outlined in the staff report to inform the work we will be doing to amend the development code in 2026. So just a little bit about the scope of this first part of the project. What we have here on the screen are the actions that came out of the city's housing production strategy. This document wasn't too many months ago that you all helped review and make recommendations on this, but the city adopted the housing production strategy in June of this year. This document included different actions that the city would pursue over the course of the next 6 years to help ensure that the city's identified housing needs are met. And I just realized in looking at the slide that one of the actions is cut off. There's actually 5 planning work program actions here, but what's important is the highlighted action here, which is action C. And that action in the housing production strategy directed the city to look at consider shifting some of its residential land use review processes to an administrative review, which means a review and decision that is done at a staff level, subject to additional call-up or appeal by a hearing board. And we had planned to start that work in our timeline kind of in the middle of the 6-year period. However, around the same time that we were finalizing the housing production strategy, bills were coming out of the legislature fast and furious. And one of these bills that ended up being passed into law was Senate Bill 974. This is a multi-part bill that does a few different things, but for the purposes of our work in this project, one of the things, the key thing that it requires is for certain types of residential development applications to be reviewed through what is essentially an administrative review process, generally consistent with, although not quite the same as our current Class 2 administrative review process. And that has to, essentially, we have to comply with those requirements by July 1st of next year. So we are moving up Action C and looking at how we can take those recommendations from the housing production strategy and kind of work with the requirements we have from this piece of legislation to ensure that we are still reviewing residential land use applications in a customer service friendly way. So we don't want it to be too onerous or confusing to applicants. Likewise, we want to maintain public access in the process and maintain the transparency that we've had over our history here in Wilsonville in reviewing land use applications. And so that is what we seek to do with this phase of the work. Just a quick slide here on project schedule. We kicked this project off in a couple of months ago in the fall. We briefed City Council on the project just to give them some background on what it was that we were going to be looking at, knowing that we would be coming back to them with some more detailed analysis, which is where we're at right now. We will be presenting that information to you and also to City Council next Monday at a work session. But we've got a pretty aggressive timeline here to meet that statutory deadline. So from here, we're going to be hoping to get your feedback on some questions we have about how to move forward with the goal of coming back to you in March with draft development code amendments. Now, I will say as we move forward in our discussion tonight that, you know, we might not solve every policy question we have, and that's okay. There might be some outstanding questions that we want to research a little further, or maybe we've got a couple of options and we want to think about them a little more, and that's fine. We just want to have a general sense of where we're going with the process so that we know how to construct our development code amendments. So the goal then would be to have a public hearing before you all in April so that adoption hearings can happen with council in May, so that this process is effective in our development code by the time the statutory requirement is in place. So before we get into the code analysis, I just want to refresh the Planning Commission on our land use review process. I know because you deal with more policy-based legislative actions, you're not always as tied into the nuts and bolts of this work, with the exception of the few prior DRB members who we have on the commission. This might look a little more familiar to you, but I want to make sure we're all operating from the same baseline level of understanding. So with a land use application, and so this could be an application for new development or modifications to development, even sign permits, they all go through what we call our land use review process, generally classified into 3 different categories. The first category is our Class 1 administrative review. So when you see administrative review, that is a staff level review and decision. So in a Class 1, these are things that are pretty much verifying compliance with plans that have already been adopted. So very, very minor modifications to a development project underway. Things like a sign permit that is consistent with a prior approval. Things like the type A tree removal permits that we have. These are things that they come in. We do not have a public notice period because the decision that is being made is considered ministerial. And what that means is that, it's really kind of yes or no. Does this meet the standard? Doesn't. There's no discretion exercised in making that decision. And so these decisions are issued. There is typically not a staff report that goes along with these. And these decisions are only appealable by the applicant. So they cannot be called up to the DRB or appealed by another party that is not the applicant. Our Class 2 administrative review process, which I would say probably comprises the bulk of land use applications we get here at the city. These are decisions that are issued by the planning director after a public notice period, and that is a mailed public notice to residents or property owners, specifically within a certain radius of the application site. That public notice period is 10 days. Comments are received, and then the information that we have is taken and a decision is issued at a staff level. Notification of that decision is sent out to our DRB boards, and those decisions can be either appealed to or called up by the DRB. And so these are typically things where we're looking at clear and objective standards. So there's still not a ton of discretion used in making the decision, but it might be something that isn't necessarily, entirely consistent with a previously approved plan. I will say that clear and objective standards are really kind of key here in looking at what we're reviewing under this process. And I will note too that this is mostly used for modifications to plans. The modification threshold is pretty low in terms of eligible activities on a site. So for instance, if you've got a commercial project and they want to build a storage room or they want to expand and build a new entry, and if that is more than 1,250 square feet, it is no longer eligible under our current standards to be a Class 2 review. There's a couple of other triggers as well based on site area disturbed or change, but that, it's much more narrow in scope, with one exception that I'll talk about in a minute. And then the final classification is Class 3, quasi-judicial review. This is typically applications that are going to the DRB for a public hearing. This has historically been every application for new development within the city. You go to a public hearing, that decision is made by the DRB after a public hearing, with a couple of exceptions for application types where the decision is actually made by City Council, in which case that is a recommendation made by DRB. These applications can be appealed by applicants, by parties withstanding, or they can be called up by city council as well. They do have a public notice period associated with them. And so you have the public notice, you have the public hearing, and then a decision is made. So the one exception that I mentioned in terms of Class 2 is within our Coffee Creek Design Overlay District. These were changes made to the city's development code in 2018. And what this did was enable a process for a Class 2 staff level review for applications for new development within this area, meeting the clear and objective standards of the development code that was also simultaneously adopted for this area. The notion here being that there was some master planning that was done, there was an expectation set by the city as to what the city wanted development to look like here. So development code standards were adopted in line with what that vision was. And so the notion being that if you have an application and it's meeting all of the standards that are clearly defined in the code, and even though this is outside of the city, if you have an annexation request, we know it's going to be industrial on the comp plan map. We know what the zoning is going to be. So is there a way we can, speed up the process and create a little more predictability? And so what was adopted here was a process whereby anything meeting the standards was reviewed and approved administratively with annexation and zone map amendment requests that would otherwise be approved by city council going straight to city council. And so I describe this because looking at what we have to change in the code, this area could serve as a possible framework for how we might want to approach it. And so with that, I'm going to pause for a moment before we go into the code memo and see if there are any questions.
Okay, all right, seeing none.
And I'm going to take my water break here.
Yep,
Give me a moment.
take a water break.
Okay. So this next slide, we're not going to focus too much on this in our discussion, but these are what we've deemed in our initial analysis to be required changes to our process under Senate Bill 974. This is based on the work that we've done in assessing our code. I'm going to get another drink of water here. Hold on.
Do you want me to jump in for just a couple minutes, or do you?
Go ahead, Heather.
Okay, yeah. And I'm very hoarse too. I'm just returning from Nevada from really dry weather, so we're going to do our best here, but we'll just tag team as we go along. So the audit that we provided has some action items, which are the city should do these things, and some consider items, which is the city could do these things. So the items here on the slide are your should do items to comply with state law. So the new changes from SB 974 include zoning map amendments that increase residential density. There's a little bit of ambiguity at the state level about what that exactly means, but we think we can address that with a code amendment. Your plan development review process right now has a stage 1 and stage 2 built into it. Both of those are going before your development review board. So both of those would need to be moved over to that class 2 administrative review. And then the same thing is any variances and waivers to residential development standards. So if those are currently being heard by your development review board, those would also need to switch over to your type 2 review. And then the other piece that is the should rather than the could is the time frame for a class 2 administrative review public hearing or public period to provide public notice. And right now it's a 10-day for your class 2 administrative reviews, and that would need to increase to 14 days to comply with that state law.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll mention here too, so we've assessed we've done our own assessment of the statute. We've consulted with Ms. Gail Hinman, the city attorney, about some of her thoughts. We will be continuing to do that as we develop the code amendments. There is also an office at the state level called the Housing Accountability and Production Office. They are a fairly new office, kind of Collaboration between DLCD and the Building Codes Division of the state, tasked specifically to look at residential development and residential development processes. They have published guidance on how they believe some of the statutory language should be applied. And so I will say that our initial work has taken those pieces into account. That being said, there's in that guidance has a lot of consult your attorney in it. So I think as we get into the nuts and bolts of the actual amendments themselves, and if there are any questions you have, those are certainly things that we are going to work on further with her. So now we're going to get to the codes. And there's, I think, kind of 5 key pieces here, if I'm remembering right, that I want to walk through. We will hold time for discussion of these at the end. I suspect that some of them might lead to more discussion than others. I do want to make sure we don't get bogged down in each individual one, but I do want to talk about and make sure we have your feedback on all of them. So the first item is the annexation process. And so this is not anything that is addressed by Senate Bill 974. However, our housing production strategy and talking about looking at an administrative review process, does include this as one element of that. We've, in our assessment, and I use this image on your screen to illustrate the area for residential development that at least in the somewhat near future will be the subject of annexation requests in Frog Pond. There's really a couple different paths. Right now you go to DRB and then DRB makes a recommendation to council. If consistent with the housing production strategy action, if we wanted to look at how we can kind of simplify the process a bit, one option would be to offer an expedited hearing process similar to what we do in Coffee Creek, because essentially you have a similar situation here where you have an area that has been thoroughly master planned. And so the zoning, the comp plan categorization has already been applied. And so really the annexation is the act of bringing it into the city boundary and ensuring that the development that's proposed is meeting the goals of the master plan. And so that's really the exact same situation that we had in Coffee Creek. So that's one option. Another option would be a process whereby that is established by Metro, the regional government, and it's an expedited decision procedure for qualified applications. And what that means is essentially, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, if you have 100% of the property owners signing on to the annexation petition, as well as 50% of the electors, and what that is anybody who lives in the area that is a registered voter. If you have all of those signatures on your petition, it's a process whereby that can be reviewed and processed without a public hearing. Did I get that right?
Exactly right.
Great. So it's 2 different choices, and they're not necessarily one or the other. In looking at these, our initial recommendation would be to adopt the expedited hearing process similar to Coffee Creek for a couple of reasons. One, I think we're looking at ways that we can not create too many different procedures and practices in the city. We're trying to keep, as much as we can, things kind of consistent with processes we've already established. And so we have an established process for annexation already in Coffee Creek. That's pretty similar. The Metro decision procedure is an option. However, it's possible we could get a development that doesn't qualify for that, and we have no choice, can't really use it. And so we just thought from an administrative perspective that going with something we've already done seemed most reasonable. And so that would be our recommendation at this point. The next topic is comprehensive plan map amendments. And this one's interesting because going back to the slide I just had, Frog Pond, we've applied a comprehensive plan map designation. So any development application there that's being annexed does not need a comprehensive plan map amendment. a comprehensive plan map amendment in the city of Wilsonville is only really going to happen in more of an infill situation within the city. And so I used this map to illustrate an area where we've had these before. This is the Renaissance at Canyon Creek area. This used to be initially before development happened here, it was a larger lot subdivision. And you can see there's still lots there that are from the original plat of the area. But there were development applications a little over 20 years ago that started in this area that kind of on a piece-by-piece basis sought a change in the comprehensive plan map designation. We think it's a pretty limited applicability of where we might see comprehensive plan map amendments related to development applications for residential development within the city. Right now, this is a process in state statute that does require a public hearing, so there is no option for us to consider something administrative. And so what that means then is, do you send it straight to city council, or does it really benefit from having input from a land use body in the city to help support that recommendation being made to city council? I would note that, in the past, there have been detailed findings that need to be made to support this type of comprehensive plan map change, because unlike a master planned area where we have a sense of what the density will be or what the uses will be, in an infill situation like this, we don't have that. So there is a higher level of discretion and therefore a need for more detailed findings. So because of that, our initial recommendation is to retain the existing hearing process for this type of application, because it would provide the most public access and public deliberation of a more discretionary type of land use decision. The next category here is just what I'll call other applications. These are applications that are not directly identified in Senate Bill 974. However, they are applications that are typically a part of a residential land use development application. So site design review, which is really the piece that looks at not so much design of individual homes, because we do not review those through site design review, but it looks at elements like open spaces and parks and street trees. Then we also have the tentative subdivision plat, which is the process whereby the individual lots are created, as well as most often a type C tree removal and preservation plan, where tree removal is proposed with development. And so our recommendation here is that to best implement Action C and really try to maintain consistency in a process, that we would recommend for residential development that these be reviewed as consolidated application package through the Class 2 process, along with the initial plan development applications that are required to be reviewed administratively by Senate Bill 974. These are, typically, again, for residential development, more often than not, it's a clear and objective standard that we're applying. And otherwise, we're going to end up in a situation where you have one set of applications being reviewed administratively and one decision issued, and then a separate set of applications for the same project, having another staff report and another decision process, which does not seem to be as customer service friendly. The next aspect is mailed notifications, and I specifically say the mailed notifications because this is the piece that is related to the development code. I think there are other conversations we might want to have about notifications in general that aren't necessarily tied to what is required in the development code. But I've noted here on this slide what we currently require for a DRB public hearing, what we currently do versus what we currently do for a Class 2 administrative review. In both cases, we have that 250-foot notice radius. The timelines are slightly different. You have to have at least 20 days before a quasi-judicial hearing. for your mailed notice for DRB, whereas right now, the comment period is 10 days, but as we mentioned, that really needs to be 14 days. In both cases, the notices of decision are sent to a review body. In the case of the staff level review, that notice of decision is sent to DRB. In the case of the DRB hearing, that notice of decision is sent to City Council, with both of those bodies then having a call-up ability. We also, what's different about our current process for DRB applications is that we do a site posting, although it's not required by state statute, we do that. And then we also published the information about the staff report and any associated exhibits and information on the city's website for DRB hearings. Again, that is not a requirement other than the staff report piece of that and exhibits, but just other information, making it available is something we do for DRB. So our recommendation as it relates to the development code is to change the mailed notice radius to 100 feet, because that is actually the statutory requirement for everything. And in my conversations with the city attorney, making sure we have consistency helps reduce legal risk that can come when you have differing radiuses, or if you use the incorrect radius, that can expose the city to procedural errors when it comes to somebody who might appeal a decision. The other piece, and this is reflected in the memo, is that the intent of a Class 2 process that uses clear and objective standards is really kind of verifying compliance. I think this came up when we talked about this during the housing production strategy, that one of the challenges we have with DRB hearings for items with clear and objective standards is that feeling of, you might hear testimony from a nearby resident or property owner, and it might be a great idea, but also if the application is meeting the clear and objective standards in the code, there's really nothing the city can do to compel that applicant to make changes because they have an application that complies. And so in many respects, the notice radius that is used for these processes is reflective of that. And so that's our recommendation here. I do think as well we are open to ideas for kind of knowing that some of these applications do have to utilize a Class 2 review, what ideas we would have for other pieces of public awareness that maybe don't get tied into the development code amendments specifically. And the last item I have is about the land use review board roles in the city. Historically, since at least the late 1990s, when the current structure was adopted by the city, there have been very discrete and distinct roles for the Planning Commission and the DRB. The Planning Commission reviews legislative items, and so these are things like development code text amendments, comprehensive plan text amendments, large area amendments to the zone map or comprehensive plan map, adoption of master plans, things of that nature. Whereas the DRB has, its purview has really been land use applications, serving in that role as a judge as to whether or not an application meets the standards or doesn't meet the standards. The DRB does not make policy in making those decisions. And so those roles have been very separate historically. This graphic we have is just a snapshot of applications we've received since 2020, and when I say received and moved forward through the process, so not anything that was withdrawn. And it's about 1/4 of the applications that are residential in nature and would be affected and essentially taken out of the DRB's purview. And that is if we didn't make any other changes to things like thresholds for Class 2 review, because sometimes the DRB does hear items and it's not new development, it's minor changes, but changes that triggered that threshold. And in thinking about our options moving forward, one of the things we want to be mindful of, and one of the things we've just observed as staff, is really being mindful of the time and commitment that our community members have in serving in these volunteer roles on a board. application volume does ebb and flow, and it's affected by things like where development's happening in the city or what the market is doing. So some years have been busier, some years are not. I went back today just out of curiosity, and because we've canceled a lot of DRB meetings this year, and I found that we only had 2 hearings and decisions across both boards the entire year. And that's not to say that that volume is going to remain. I sure hope it doesn't. But, it's an indicator that, we all put time and investment in training and learning, and we want to make sure that that time is being used. It's of value to everybody involved. And so I think as we see it, knowing that these changes are coming, it feels like potentially 2 DRB boards to maintain that in light of these changes might be a lot. There are a couple options, and so one would just keep a single DRB board and keep that board as being the entity reviewing the quasi-judicial hearings like we do now. And that would include any appeals that would be made to land use applications under that Class 2 process. Another option would be to eliminate the DRB altogether and use the Planning Commission for all land use decisions. And while that is a departure from the city's past practice, at least over the past 25 to 30 years, it is an option that's used by many communities in the state. And so our recommendation, we honestly don't know what is best, and this is where we want to hear from people. We do think that one of these 2 approaches makes sense. Your input will be helpful. I think the city council, when we talk to them next week, will really appreciate what you have to say about this. And so, I feel like this is one of those where we're probably not coming out of this round of work sessions with a clear recommendation, but we want to hear opinions so that we can weigh approaches moving forward. And so with that, we've made it to the discussion questions, really around what do you think about these recommendations? And, if you don't have a specific thought, is there additional information that's helpful for you when we come back next time? If you do have any comments on the administrative review thresholds, that's helpful for us to consider because we do have to change them for residential development. So we're opening it up anyway. And then, if, as you saw on the slide when we talked about the schedule, we do have some public outreach programmed in there for the early part of next year. I think we don't exactly know what form that's going to take, but we want to know your thoughts on what type of input would best assist you in making final recommendations. And so that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. And there's a lot of pieces packed into this. So I think maybe the way I'm recommending we approach it is if you could go back a couple slides to the beginning, the annexation slide, we can talk about that and then move forward, recognizing we do have quite a few. So just keeping that in mind as we discuss each item, and then we can end with the other 2 questions about, or thresholds if it comes up, or public comment. So,
Sounds great.
Okay, so looking to planning commissioners for any questions for staff or initial thoughts around the annexation recommendation. The options there. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Well, first off, Kim, thank you. The report is easy for me to follow, and it helps bring me up to speed and follow along, so that's great. And I really like the recommendations. That's helpful to understand your perspective. You're the experts in the field. So that's been fantastic. If we're just talking about the annexation part, I think using that Coffee Creek process makes sense. It's consistent. We have a track record. It seems to work, and it seems to be consistent with expediting housing production and the process. So I like that approach as it relates to annexation. So that's it for me.
Great, thanks. We want to go down the line. Let's do it.
It's up to you.
Yeah, I'm curious. I want to hear what it wants.
Okay, so on the annexation, would the expedited hearing process be contingent on whether the land is master planned?
I mean, we could write it that way. Metro's process would not is probably agnostic to that,
Okay.
but that would be something I think if we offered that, we could probably add our own eligibility criteria.
I would also add, in just thinking through the logistics of this, is that any land annexing will have to be added to the urban growth boundary, and therefore it would require that it be concept
Requires.
plan and master planned.
Is there any chance that that requirement would change in the future? And the reason why I ask is I like the idea of we have a clear plan for how it's going to be done, and we're not just bringing land in with no clear context for what it's going to be used for. That's what my thoughts are.
There would have to be a lot of unraveling of both state and regional requirements and statute. Now, we've had a very active state legislature in the past 5 years. So I can't say anything definitively, but it would require, you would have to change like regional urban growth boundary processes and annexations. I don't see a way with the established urban and rural reserve system that we have in the metro region for that happening. But I mean, that's something, we can note that and think about the different implications of
Yeah.
including or not including that language and spend some more time thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm not hard over on it, but it's an interesting, I just want to make sure that we're thoughtful about bringing land in, so. Other than that, I'm good with it.
I am supportive of, oh, my screen went black, sorry. It's back. Okay, I'm definitely supportive of the staff recommendation for the expedited hearing process, similar to Coffee Creek. That way we just have consistent processes that we're applying. That'll help people navigate things a little easier.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think expedited with the Coffee Creek is great. One clarification I had, this is just for residential, or is it any annexation that would be consistent with the master
This
plan?
is just for residential development.
Okay.
So, because we're recommending an expedited hearing process like what's in Coffee Creek and not doing the metro procedure, is ours more specific than Metro's, or is there a chance that Metro's going to override anything that we say?
Do you want me to just jump? Yeah, so, excuse me, the Metro expedited decision procedure has those requirements about the number of landowners and the voters. And then they don't have specific requirements similar to having a hearing or not. They have like post the notice on the site, but the Metro requirements for annexation still apply to Wilsonville as far as the criteria, but not the procedure of the expedited decision. So I guess the Metro Code 3.09 has annexation, and it has a small paragraph about how to do an expedited one. The rest still applies to Wilsonville.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And then, would this require a new class? So we've got class 1, 2, and 3. Would this require a different class for these reviews?
It essentially would still be a council decision, and
So are we going to have to change class 1 to account for this?
no, so any decision that, even though we don't refer it to it this way, typically it's known in kind of the statewide parlance as being like a type 4 decision, which is essentially a decision made by the city council. So the way it's written for Coffee Creek into the development code right now under section 4.700, which is annexations, it essentially has a carve out for applications within Coffee Creek that meet the master plan. So we'd probably just amend that language, but it would just go straight to council.
Okay, so would we amend because this would become citywide?
Under the scope of this project, it would really just be for residential development. But in
Any
effect,
residential citywide, so then the Coffee Creek language would become superfluous?
Uh,
Should we take it out of the Coffee Creek if it's,
We'll have to look at those specifics when we draft the code. We'll make sure, we will do it in a way that doesn't inadvertently add the ability to do this in areas not intended for it.
okay. Otherwise, I'm in favor of the expedited hearing process.
Out of curiosity, I haven't gone to a DRB meeting. How much involvement is there from the public in those meetings? There's not very much in our meetings. So I'm just curious.
It depends. I would say our observation where we have the most involvement tends to be applications, sometimes residential, sometimes not, but applications where there are surrounding neighbors. So less often for industrial development because there are not surrounding residential neighbors. But when we've had some of the more infill type applications, haven't so much in Frog Pond West, but you know, I could use as an example when the school came in, you had a development that had been approved adjacent to it. So the people who participated in that hearing just had questions about things related to the interface between where they lived, their neighborhood, and the new development. So that's probably most common.
Okay, so people would still have a chance to come and ask their questions in the city council meetings related to this when the decisions are being made. So city
Correct.
council would still be able to take those questions or comments into consideration.
For the annexation request.
Yeah, for the annexation.
But the scope is limited to the annexation and not so much details of the development proposal itself.
Okay. All right, with all the questions asked and answered, it makes sense to me, so, yeah, I agree with this recommendation.
Great. Can we move on to the next section on the amendment? Yeah, comprehensive plan and map amendments. Do you want to start and we can, or I don't want to, we don't have to keep going down the line. That's right. Commissioner Seminover, do you have anything that you want to?
With this one, I'm good to retain the existing hearing
Okay.
process, yeah.
As am I, because of its limited scope.
Same.
Me as well.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good too.
Okay. Awesome. Next slide, please. Okay, so for other applications, the staff recommendation to review as consolidated application package through the Class 2 administrative review process. Thoughts here from the commissioners? Or questions too? Do you want to start, Commissioner Heffernan?
Sure. So just clarification, so assuming we still have a DRB, this Class 2 process would still allow for a DRB appeal / call-up. If there was something of concern, DRB could still say, hey, we want to talk about this. Is that correct?
There's a nuance here that I just want to, there's a lot of nuances here. Senate Bill 974 for the applications that are not on this screen, so the stage 1, stage 2, and zone map amendment, if that is included, those cannot be called up by the DRB. They can be appealed by the DRB. Now, the site design review, the subdivision plat, and the type C plan are not subject to 974. And this is kind of a you know, how in the weeds do we want to get with this? But technically, those could still be called up. Now, that will have to be explained in a very clear way when the decision is issued. Somebody can appeal any of those things, but it's the call-it provision that is affected by 974.
Okay. I think I'm okay with it. I like the idea of if there's something that looks sideways, that the DRB has the opportunity to say something about it. So as long as that provision's still there, which it seems like it is, I'm okay.
Other reactions? Yeah.
I just had a question. So the proposal here is to shift to a Class 2 administrative review process. That's what we're proposing.
Correct.
And it's consistent with the related plan development applications, as you say.
Correct. So to use the Coffee Creek example, this would be the Coffee Creek process.
Oh, got it.
Because you typically have, they're different application types, but Wilsonville historically consolidates everything. But we technically have a choice here. So we just want to make that right choice.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the proposal. That makes sense. Thank you.
I suspect if you were to go back and look at all the decisions, all of the cases that came in before the DRB of this variety, I would imagine the vast majority, if not 100% of them, agreed with the staff recommendation. So after having been on the DRB and going through that process, yeah, I agree with your recommendation.
I am curious if our Class 2 administrative review has to be modified for SB 974 in any way, shape, or form.
I think we're just, I don't know that the process does. Because if you change the whole process, you would, or at least for qualifying applications, you would remove the ability for the DRB or whatever board to call those up. And I mean, that's a question, is that something that we want to take away? But I think we're just going to have to be clear in how we draft the language as to, a certain subset of applications cannot be called up. And so that's where we're going to need your extra eye come March when we have draft development code amendments to make sure we've captured that nuance.
Because in our should slide, we were moving stage 1, stage 2, zone map, variance and waivers to a Class 2. And that did have the ability to be reviewed by DRB or called up by DRB, and now these are also going to be Class 2, but they will also fit into that same categorization?
So I think what we'll have to figure out what the most straightforward way is. It probably was an overgeneralization to explicitly just say Class 2. It's like a Class 2 with an asterisk.
Okay, Class 2A.
For those items on the should slide.
Okay, the should, okay.
And if I can just jump into on page 26 of the packet, when we talk about that piece, we say remove call up from Class 2, parentheses, at least for residential projects. So for those projects on the first slide, we do have to remove that call up ability, but for these, we could retain the call up ability.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense. All right.
Sorry, Commissioner Carr and Chair, if I may. I would also just know, I think Kim mentioned this a bit, but we have always in the city of Wilsonville retained kind of a process by which we process everything all together. Part of that is also because we take almost everything to the Development Review Board. And so as we think about what might we want to call up and can versus what we can't, and what really needs to be more of a staff administrative process, it is also something that we can consider in terms of, are there certain applications where staging it makes more sense? Just so that you get kind of that administrative decision, and then you have these other applications that can be reviewed that are based on that decision, and therefore in some ways easier to make. That's how sometimes it functions in other cities. There are a lot of cities that have more of like a sequential application process. We've never moved that way because I do think it's you can review everything altogether typically. And so that provides an efficiency and a service to our customers and our applicants. And I think if we can retain that, it might be beneficial. But I just want to kind of put that out on the table, is that if, as we're talking through these different considerations, and that makes sense, especially when it comes to maybe a specific application type, that, you know, we can talk about that.
I do agree with the recommendation of having these as a class 2. I'm with Ron in that I still want there, in some cases, to be the ability for, if the DRB still exists, for the, I guess if the DRB doesn't exist, it would be the Planning Commission anyway. So for that decision to be reviewed.
Commissioner Semenova, did you have anything on this?
I don't have anything to add, no, but the recommendation makes sense to package it all together for
Okay.
review.
Sounds good. And I'm supportive of the staff recommendation and do appreciate the sentiment, just to have that public review if needed.
Yeah.
All right, mailed notifications. So the recommendation is change mail notice radius to 100 feet, consistent with statutory requirements. Reactions or questions on this one? Commissioner Carr, do you want to start?
I found it interesting that we want to make it smaller. I'm okay with it if we have to. I mean, if the state is saying 100 feet makes sense, then why do we make it need it bigger? But living in the state my entire life, I'm surprised by them making it a smaller radius. But yeah, I'm in agreement.
Go for it.
I wish the other one would change. I feel like the notification should go to a larger distance, yeah. That's my perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with the recommendation here.
Commissioner Eberlein, you want to go?
Yeah, I struggle with this one. You know, for me, the concept of 250 feet gives the opportunity for public input, more directed. You know, we're giving them an opportunity to say, hey, something's happening around you. If you choose to be informed, great. If you don't, all right. And 100 feet isn't very big. So I would be okay with keeping it at 250 feet. If there's a significant amount of administrative burden that places on there, or significant legal risk, I'll look at Ms. Gile-Heineman's placard for that one, significant legal risk, I would be okay with bringing it down to 100, but my preference would be to leave it at 250 where we can, just to ensure that we give as much opportunity for public knowledge as possible.
Thank you.
I had questions too originally, but Kim, you answered them in the presentation. You said to be consistent with other areas and the reduced legal risk. So I understand from an administrative standpoint on how to manage that, it becomes difficult if it's different. So I'm okay with 100 feet. It's consistent with state law. And so I would agree with your recommendation.
My initial reaction is I don't like to see it dwindling. The opportunity for people to know about something happening near them to, get limited. So my first reaction was prefer to keep the 250 feet. I do understand that we want to be, consistent, not just with the state, but just other processes. So if we're picking and choosing what distances for different things, I could see where that could get us into some trouble. I also wonder, what if the statutory requirement changes again? There's a lot of movement at the state around housing, and so I'm just curious. I don't know if when we word some of these things and get to that phase, do we say 100 feet or do we just say consistent with statutory requirements? And I don't know if that's not helpful for those reading, then they have to look up what that is, but just to think about, how to navigate that. But I do kind of lean more towards, I prefer the 250 feet. Which it sounds like, three of us kind of prefer that and three of us. So we'll see what council.
Remind me, is the 100 feet is this for residential only or any class 2? or a hearing notification, sorry.
So it's for, in state statute, it's actually for anything that would apply to the city, so quasi judicial hearings, things that are called limited land use decisions, which are, it's essentially a process that's consistent with our class 2, and then what is in this statute as well.
Did the state give us any indication of why it's only 100? I mean, 100 feet in a neighborhood is only 3 houses. So why did the state, they have to have some logic, not that they would tell us, but.
So my understanding is the 100 feet has been established in state law for a while, and that the city of Wilsonville has chosen to exceed that historically. The issue we now face is that Senate Bill 974 is more prescriptive in saying that it can't be more than 100. Is that accurate?
It doesn't say that it can't be more, it just says 100 feet.
So it's going, like, so Senate Bill 974 is like pulling back on the prior Oregon statutory statement. And so it's starting to feel like the state is pushing to 100 feet. And then if we're going to do it for one type, then it does become an administrative problem to have different distances. And it does open us up, especially if there's like an appeal that would be maybe beyond that 100 feet. It opens up whether or not they really should have been notified, and could be an issue that's included within like the argument that goes before LUBA that the city wasn't following state notification procedures, which then just creates an administrative opportunity for the appeal, not just a substantive reason for the appeal. And that's where these things start to unravel.
So as we talk to our city attorney, if she says 250 is fine and we won't have problems with the state, I'm fine with 250. But if our city attorney recommends that we adhere to what the state is saying, not demanding, but is saying strongly, then I think we should follow that guideline. So I'm still in favor of a 250, but if it's going to cause us problems down the road, we should acquiesce, I guess.
I
have a response?
did
Go
have
for
a
it.
conversation with her about it. It's not that we can't keep 250, and perhaps this is something, we'll get council's feedback too. I mean, obviously our report out to them is going to be, it's mixed. What do you think? But the one thing she noted is where cities and where there is a LUBA case law to back this up is when you start being inconsistent with what the requirements are, whether or not that's either the state's requirement, or let's say the state has a requirement and you think that's what it is, but then the city says something else and then you're not following your own procedures, that has been used as grounds to invalidate a city's decision. And so there is legal risk. I think probably the highest priority would be to keep consistency across our processes with whatever is chosen. And I think we can, based on your feedback and what feedback we get from council, we'll revisit that before. This is something we can come back to in March if we need to.
I'd rather not give somebody more reason to appeal this to the state. So, I mean, if Amanda feels comfortable with us saying 250 and not having to worry about appeals right and left, then I would prefer the 250. I think it's, again, I'm shocked that the state has, yeah, that's only 3 houses, right? And you're not even talking about all of your neighbors. It seems pretty small.
Commissioner Heberlein, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, if we can be consistent across the board at 250 feet and that passes legal muster, let's do that. I look at it from the lens of what would the rest of our city residents think if we're arbitrarily, put that in quotes for anybody who's listening, arbitrarily reducing it from 250 down to 100 isn't the way that I would expect most of our neighbors to be happy with. So if we have the opportunity to keep it at 250 and be compliant with the intent of the laws and not give legal risk, let's do that.
And maybe this conversation also feeds into, I think one of the final questions was about like public awareness, or I can't remember what but maybe that's another conversation of, well, if we want to be legally more safe, risk adverse, maybe there's other ways to communicate things out than a mailed notice to consider, so. Okay. I think you got feedback, so I don't know if it was really clear, but yeah, it's clear. Okay. So the last one is around the land use review board roles. So there wasn't really a recommendation. It was more of like, well, maybe we should have a conversation and see kind of where we're leaning on whether we keep one of the development review boards for the quasi judicial hearings, or if that's something that maybe the planning commission should consider taking on. So does anyone have any first thoughts on this?
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Carr?
So in keeping with separation of government, I like the idea of still having a DRB, because the planning commission kind of builds the rules and the DRB applies them. So I kind of like that separation, even though you could accomplish it in two different meetings, and I think many of us have been on a DRB, but I still like that separation.
Yeah, I like the keeping of one DRB because the DRB is a great conduit for future planning commissioners, which have proven to be future city councilors. And so I think it's a great vehicle to get more people engaged, but not too many that they're idle. And exposing them to the way the city works.
That's helpful here. I'm going to share some thoughts because, I'm trying to think of my experience on development review board, and then if the workload gets even less, or if we just have one, if that's still even less, making sure I don't feel like if this is something that can be administrative or can be handled by another role, making sure that they feel empowered and that the work they're doing is important. And so I don't know, I just sometimes in DRB felt like, okay, well, this feels clear and objective, so why am I needing to review it? And then kind of along the same lines, with Planning Commission, if we're setting some of that policy and then we have to come back and see how that policy plays out, I think could also help inform us in making better policy to see how things, so I just thought it would be an interesting and we hear and see things play out anyway, so I still think that can happen with two separate, but that was kind of my first thought was that would be interesting to have to deal with the things that you set in place. So some thoughts. Commissioner Heberlein, do you have?
Yeah, I think I like keeping a DRB as long as there's enough work to support it. That's my key thing for that. If there's enough work to support it, I think it's good from a public engagement perspective. It gives more people the opportunity to participate. And as long as we're not struggling to get participation and there's enough work, have a DRB. I think it's great. Commissioner
Semenova?
Yeah, has the DRB board weighed in on this at all, or is this the first time that's being proposed?
They have not. One of the recommendations we got from our last council meeting was, as part of our public outreach, to reach out and potentially have a work session with DRB. So we likely will as part of the outreach.
Just out of curiosity.
That would be helpful.
Yeah. How do they feel about it?
Yes.
That's what I would like to know.
But how would we feel about it? So let's we already have full meetings. We usually have at least an hour and a half, but often many hours. And so this would add to that. And would you be able to support that? I think that would be a valuable feedback for the city.
How much would it add?
Most likely it'd be a second meeting.
Yeah, can you turn your mic on when you, thank you.
Yeah, most likely it'd be a second meeting, so I don't know if they try to combine the two.
Yeah, so would you?
Together,
you know,
because the
supporting a
volume
second
of-
meeting would be difficult for me.
Yeah, the volume of work that I had when I was on the DRB, there's no way it could have been done. But we had Fred Meyer and a couple other really big things going on, but the volume of work, I think we had A and B busy all the time when I was on DRB.
When I was on DRB, we weren't that busy, but you did have to do pre-work. I had to go drive by, go walk the sites, really understand them. And so it was more than just meeting time.
Correct.
And doing that on top of the planning commission preparation and the meetings, I think it would be asking a lot of a planning commissioner.
That's a good point. Thank you.
That's a really good point, yeah, because preparing for this meeting is,
Yeah. Did you want to add anything?
Just, I think the proposal to keep one DRB is a measured approach. You're using real data. You've looked at that over the last few years. I think this is changing a lot, and I think reducing it from 2 to 1 is appropriate and seems to be based on what actually is happening. And then we can reassess this as things develop. So I would support having 1.
I think we've got, cleared. That went faster than I thought. That's great. Okay. Any other, let's see, so updates to the administrative review thresholds for other uses that should be considered. Can you rephrase, just what does this really get at?
So essentially, so like a numerical threshold. So right now, just a generic example,
Thank you.
industrial building that exists with an approved development plan. If the industrial building wants to add some kind of accessory space onto its building or anywhere on its site, and that space is less than 1,250 square feet, it can go through a Class 2 process. But the minute it is 1,500 square feet, it doesn't matter how large the site is, it's going to DRB for review and approval. And so in light of the fact that, I think we wanted to pose the question because in light of the fact that you're now taking much more potentially substantive applications and reviewing them through a Class 2, and we're thinking about things like board composition and workload. And we know that if it's a multifamily building that exceeds that threshold for a change, that can't go through a class, or that would have to go through a Class 2. Do we want to think about the impact of that on other existing developments? Or alternatively, keep it as is for now?
Where'd this 1,250 come from? That seems really, really random. I mean, like 1,237 square feet, right? So like,
I've asked myself that question many times.
I don't know. I think it's just been in the code for a really long time.
Interesting. Okay.
like it's just totally random. What's the impact if we change this threshold? I mean, what happens if we change it to 1,500? What does that do? Just more items would go through an administrative review and less through a Class 2?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say like that difference is all that great. I mean, where we have been in situations, and there's another threshold that's in the code, although it's kind of been invalidated with the new parking standards, but there was a 10 space threshold where if you added or removed 10 spaces, you went to DRB. And, now that we don't have minimum parking, we don't look at that one the same way, but, and a lot of times there's a lot of work that goes into that, and then the DRB would kind of be like, oh, okay, it's just adding 15 spaces. Okay. So it's the same thing where we sometimes have applications where it's like an accessory building on the site, or it's 2,000 square feet on a 80,000 square foot building. And I know that's kind of a sliding scale. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach for everything, but I think one of the questions we would have is it a numerical standard? Is there something, there's a difference between new development, is it a percentage? Is it, is there a different threshold maybe? Or maybe not, I don't know, but.
I mean, could you do it? So this would be applicable to industrial and residential?
And commercial, yeah.
So could you do it a percentage? What I'm trying to say is, a 2,000 square foot house, and I'm putting a 1,250 square foot addition is much different than putting a 1,250 square foot addition on a 1,000 square foot building, right? So can you make it a component of both the square footage and a percentage? Because I think what we're trying to do here, if I'm anticipating this, is have less that goes through because of additions that should be easily applied to an administrative review. Is that what we're
Yeah, I think
trying to
that's
do
the
by looking at
question.
thresholds?
That's the question. I think just kind of fundamentally, if you're taking what is inherently more substantive
Right.
and putting that through a class 2 process, are we creating inequities? It's really kind of that. Obviously, I think there's still a lot of the city that we don't have commercial and industrial standards that are as clear and objective as they are in Coffee Creek. And so you wouldn't want to say, oh, all new development is class 2 when we don't have the same level of standards. But I think it really got us thinking when we were wondering about these much smaller types of reviews that don't have a ton of discretion because they are existing development. Maybe they generate some additional trips, it depends, but
Because I think this came up,
yeah.
came up once in the DRB where they were adding a garbage and recycling repository onto a commercial building or industrial building or something, and it was, and the DRB reviewed it, and it was, I guess, silly is what I would say, that it was reviewed by the DRB. That could have easily been done by an administrative review, but it probably was above that 1250. So I'm in favor of a percent with a like 1250 minimum. I really wish you could explain the 1250 to me, but maybe we'll say that was Blaze's creativity.
So, yeah, maybe exploring that option further with some maybe like examples or just some more options there. Any other thoughts on that front?
Yeah, if the city feels like it would reduce the burden on your staff, and it isn't, I think we should consider it.
Yeah. Commissioner Heberlein?
Yeah, I agree with considering it, and I'll defer to staff judgment on whether it's just a hard percentage or some more complicated formula or something. But if 1250 doesn't have any basis in historical knowledge, get rid of it.
All right, and then the last question, I misremembered what it was about community input, but it was just what will best assist you in final recommendations about these updates. Sounds like we'll maybe hear from Development Review Board members on their kind of opinions on the two options there, and then any other input? Seeing no's?
I
Or
always
wonderings, yep.
kind of crave, what are the other communities surrounding us doing? Like, are we wildly out of whack with our sister communities or not? There's something I've always craved that we don't do a lot of.
If I may, could you be more specific about that? Is that in terms of getting community input or like their land use processes?
Their response to some of these state mandates, how are they handling them? Yeah.
I haven't spoken to all my partners, but I have spoken to some of them. And there's already a lot of variety in terms of how cities process applications. So we are one of a few cities, I would say, in the region who still process the majority through a board.
Yeah.
With the changes for clear and objective standards, when that occurred, many more cities moved to an administrative process for more application types than we have. And so I think we feel a little bit more pressure to get 974, the changes that we need to comply with 974 in before the deadline because we're at a higher risk because so many of our processes are not in alignment with it. But another city that I've spoken with, they think that the vast majority, if not all of their processes already essentially comply with 974. And so from that perspective, it's not nearly as big of a project or as big of a conversation in that city. So it's kind of across the board, I would say. And then some other cities have less staff, weren't necessarily paying as close of attention during the legislative process. We have a great government affairs team and a lot of communication that occurs inside this building. So, and I try to stay in tune with the LOC to make sure I'm following the bills. And so I think that there were definitely some folks who are coming at it later in the process as well, and they're still trying to figure it out. So it's kind of a mix.
Well, and to your kind of later point, just with being proactive of following bills in the session, and I know we have a short session coming up, which usually is just more technical, or it's not as much typically than the long session, but I do wonder just with how much of our work has been around a lot of, making sure that we're meeting state regulations and stuff, what can we anticipate, for the next year or what's coming up in the legislative session. So in terms of bringing it back to the question of community input, I also just want to hear from our, state representatives and senators of when they're talking through these things, are they collaborating with cities to see how these really impact or how they have a lot of changes in a short amount of time. So it's things I'm curious about, yeah. Okay, well, given that, I think you have what you need.
I think so. We all very much appreciate your input. This is super helpful, and I know City Council will appreciate it when we present it next week. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Given we're behind on schedule, and I don't see anyone in person for public comment, and then checking with staff to see if anyone is online before I take quite a bit of time to read public comment script.
I do have one person online. Please raise your hand if you are planning to speak. I see no hands raised.
Okay, seeing that there's no one interested in giving public comment, then I'm going to continue on to informational a section of our agenda, and I believe we have one item from our planning director.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hendricks. So as we close out the night tonight and we close out 2025, I just want to finish with a few words for a couple of our commissioners whose last meeting is tonight. And I was going to check in with you to make sure I could announce it. But that is both Commissioner Willard and Commissioner Heberlein. Serving one's community is one of the most overlooked, but also one of the most generous things that and gifts that somebody can give. Time is precious, and our community volunteers give of their time to better the greater good of the city that they live in and the people who live around them. And so on behalf of the Wilsonville community, I want to thank you both for the generous contribution of your time and acknowledge everything that you've done over many years, not just your planning commission volunteer service. Jennifer, I first met you when you were on the Development Review Board. And then a few years later, you got to join our planning commission, which was very exciting. I have always really appreciated your knowledge of construction and corporate decision-making. I feel like that has helped keep a lot of the decisions that we make in mind in terms of how our making sure that we're being business friendly and that we're thinking about that perspective in the community and being rooted in market realities and not being too strict with some of the regulations we might set. But then also pushing forward recommendations that also didn't damper the city's aspirations because you still maintained an aspirational mindset for the community that you lived in. And that was both from an economic development perspective, but also in promoting housing that is more affordable for the people who live here. You're so smart, positive, thoughtful, and you have a great laugh. I've really been grateful for all the time that you've put into your service here in supporting planning, growth, and development in Wilsonville on both the DRB and PC, and that I hope someday you find your way back to Wilsonville, and you'll always be welcome at this dais.
Thank you.
Commissioner Heberlein, when I started, I met you on the Frog Pond West Task Force. Shortly after you joined the Town Center Task Force, and then the Planning Commission. And you have essentially been involved in every major planning project and legislative decision that I've been since I joined the city 11 years ago.
So we share a record. I have appreciated your preparedness and your attention to detail in ways that may not have been the way that us planners think. Your empathy and always remaining focused on the people that we're trying to serve has also been one of your strongest assets and something I've appreciated. And so you've been able to move from that detailed perspective also to the big picture and really advocate for recommendations that you thought would make a difference in people's lives. So thank you also for supporting planning, growth, and development in Wilsonville for full terms on both the DRB and PC. You've exhausted all your years. I can say that I've reviewed the language, and after a break, you can come back if you want. Just putting that out there. So anyways, I've really enjoyed working with you, and I do hope we get the opportunity again someday. And, and we do have some cookies in the back, and so I want to make sure everybody sticks around and socializes a little bit and has a treat.
Thank you for sharing that, and I'll hand it over to you both if you want to share anything or, and I mean, you speak so eloquently. And I just want to say I've really enjoyed working with you both and getting to know you, and I know that I'll see you around outside of Planning Commission sometime, I'm sure. And yeah, you're just great planning commissioners, and we'll miss you a lot. This will be very weird in January to have, you know, two really great folks not joining us. So anyways, I don't know who wants to, do you want to say anything?
Sure. Yeah, I will say, oh, it's been a hell of a run. Yeah, January 2015 was when I started with DRBA.
Oh my gosh.
And then February of 2018 with the Planning Commission.
How many meetings, how many hours? Like, do you have the stats?
Oh, God. No, I don't. I probably should have. I'm a poor engineer for not having that. I will say I've been blessed to have so many great DRB members, planning commissioners, to go through this process with. The level of support's been fantastic. You know, the people have been the reason why I've stayed, and for staff. I wouldn't have done this without you guys. You guys are awesome. I mean, you guys have made this city what it is. You know, we're here coming in once a month trying to give our feedback, but you guys are here every day. And the work, the effort you put in, the rest of the city doesn't always see that. So I want to make sure that you guys know that you guys are rock stars. And I wouldn't have done this for 10 plus years without you guys. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I joined, I remember I put in my application because of the 2016 election, and I thought, I need to get involved. I'm going to start local. And so it actually helped me so much feel more connected to my community and feel like I was contributing, doing my part. And yeah, you know, when thinking about the staff, you know, you guys have had so little turnover, none that I can think of. And the work that you guys put in helping explain it to us that aren't policy savvy has been really helpful. And so, you know, what I found that over the years is now I can have intelligent conversations with my community members, and I can explain to them, you know, why some of these decisions are made or why things are what they are, and I can advocate for the city. And so my husband and I take a walk every night after dinner, and half the time I'm like, no, but you don't understand. And I practice my arguments on him first. But it has been a wonderful experience, and so I will miss this city, and I will miss the staff, and I will miss the board for sure. Thank you so much.
Other commissioners?
I'd like to say, thank you to both of you. I know I've worked with, I think, both of you in the past. And appreciate everything that you've done. You make it fun, right? And like Ron says, it's the people. I mean, what keeps me volunteering is knowing that I'm in a community that I love. The staff loves the community as well, and the people on the commissions obviously do. So the community I haven't lived in a whole lot of communities in my years, but this has been the best community that I've spent my time in, and people like Ron and Jennifer that make it what it is. So appreciate all of your efforts.
Welcome back.
Yeah, you guys are going to be sorely missed.
Yeah.
Sorely missed. I've learned so much from both of you. For the first time being a volunteer, all the questions that you ask and just hearing how your minds think through these things, it's been eye-opening. And we'll definitely miss all the things you have to contribute. Yeah, it's been really great to get to know you. And hopefully we can do well. I know the remaining
Hopefully we'll be
folks
okay.
will do. Yeah, I don't know. It feels like we're losing a big part of a team.
Yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting transition, right? Because we
Yeah.
had Dan leave, and then Sam, and now you two. So we're in a big shift right now. So
Yeah.
we gotta hold it down, folks. Hold it down. We gotta hang it.
Pressure's on.
Yeah, it's okay. It'll be great. It will be great. Next year will be
Thank
great.
you both for everything.
Vote to elect Nicole as.
No, oh my God.
I was gonna say,
Do not do that right now.
you were,
Love you, but-
okay, but, so, noted, she does not want to be chair. However, you didn't want to be chair last time, but you have done such an amazing
Okay,
job.
all right, okay.
So,
Thank you. This is not about the chair role. All right, so with that, I think we're on to the next item, which is to adjourn the meeting. So we've completed all our scheduled agenda items. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
and
Second.
I'll second.
Beautiful, thank
Yeah, that's
you.
appropriate.
The meeting is adjourned at 7:31 PM. Thanks.